Why does it seem like I can't just enjoy games on my own terms anymore? And what better way to highlight this than with Pokémon? Online discourse seems to run rampant these days, and very few games come out the other side unscathed. Whether it's a juggernaut or an unpolished mess, it feels like there's always a right and wrong game to play. But why though? What happens to the days of just picking up a game to see for myself? Well, I know the answer to that. It's the internet. On one hand, it's such a valuable tool for community and discovery. On the other hand, the constant scrutiny can be a lot. And it got to me. Despite so many releases over the years, I didn't get my first Pokemon Switch game until 2023, way later into the system's lifespan. I even listened to the internet and got Legends Arceus, arguably the best one. And they were right, but as much as I loved this new direction, I wanted that classic formula on my Switch. Except, how could I even choose when each one of them were problematic in their own way? Was I gonna be a bad person for buying subpar games? Or was I becoming a blind sheep for letting random opinions sway my decisions? Did I even like Pokemon anymore? Until one day, I snapped. I hated the constant noise. I needed a mainline Pokemon game and I needed it now. So, out of morbid curiosity, I committed treason and got myself Brilliant Diamond. Years after the controversy, I wanted to see just how bad this remake was, on my own terms. Instead, what I found was an oddly comforting game that I keep coming back to. One of the most disappointing Pokemon remakes. I still found joy in playing. Wild. Let me explain. But before that, here's what it was like for me to get games before the internet. Being born in 2000, I was one of the last generations to experience games before social media. Luckily, I did have access to the internet, but I didn't go out of my way to look for other people's opinions. I never saw many of those cool video game magazines either, so I rarely consumed reviews or discussions. The closest thing would have most likely been watching Let's Plays, where the creator usually left room for the game to speak for itself, which meant I was super susceptible to those wacky commercials on TV. I also did this ancient thing where I would go to the store and pick a game based on the box art. I know, ew. Was my scope a bit narrow? Obviously, but I wouldn't expect a child to have diverse tastes just yet. But that doesn't mean I was completely cut off either. I roughly knew when the next Pokemon or Mario games were coming out. Of course, I always wanted more games than what we could afford, but I didn't have an excess of choice yet, so I could either get the most out of the current games I did have, or do nothing at all. But for the most part, I was content with the games I already owned, even the bad ones, cause at the time, these were all equal games to me, and it was whatever I felt like playing at the moment. So let's fast forward to 2021, well into the social media era, where the takes are spicy and almost nothing is nuanced. I remember the hype for the Sinnoh remake announcement was massive, with this ongoing live stream of Fur running on an escalator symbolizing that moment in time. I was excited too, and the expectations were sky high. So, if you're even remotely a Pokemon fan during this time, you know how controversial this release was. Like, my god, the internet was up in flames. From the moment that Chibi Dawn made her debut, to the moment it hit the eShop with the day one patch, there was no getting around it. The remakes were huge disappointments, and this was before I had any Pokemon games on my Switch. At the time, I wasn't really in the mood for Pokemon, but even I heard about the discourse loud and clear. From the outside looking in, it did not look like a fun time to be a Pokemon fan. All the think pieces and video essays admittedly swayed me from the games. I mean, how could I not? People were saying that this was an embarrassment to the franchise. It sounded like the series was going downhill, and nothing will save it. Why waste $60 whole on a clearly rushed game, right? Who could ever touch this monstrosity? Well, some things I just had to see for myself, and what I played honestly surprised me. Look, I grew up playing Gen 4 to death. The bias goes both ways. I care about Sinnoh so much, but that also means I'm more forgiving of it. I'm not the person to give objective assessments. I don't have the brain cells for that. But after 100 full hours of the Sinnoh remakes, I can honestly say that I had genuine fun. Going in, I knew what to expect. It wasn't gonna surpass any of my expectations. Based on the disappointed reviews, I thought at best, I'd think this game was just gonna be fine but forgettable. Instead, I just found other ways to enjoy the game, outside of the story and graphics. For one thing, I wholeheartedly enjoy the Grand Underground so much more now. Some people might view it as a grind, but I saw it as a very nice brain-off activity, something to passively do while watching YouTube or talking with friends. I liked the original Underground, but adding catchable Pokemon to the mix makes this mode so much more replayable to me. I could literally spend hours grinding for spheres and evolution stones while level grinding on the side, and if I'm not mistaken, it's possible to complete the entire national dex up to Sinnoh between these two games, thanks to the addition of underground spawns. I think that's genuinely cool, and I'm calling it right now. That's gonna be praised in the future as soon as the BDSP hate train dies down. That was just one example, but other quality of life mechanics, like challenging rematches, easier ways to get rare items, and useful map features made me realize something. Personally, it doesn't matter what they added or removed in relation to other games. I want to assess the games for what they are, not what they should have been. In the case of a remake, it's fair to compare it to the originals, but I also think it's important to remember the context between then and now. As much as I love Gen 4, even I can admit that the engine is just way too clunky for today's standards. I can tolerate a lot, but I can only look at static sprites and sluggish HP bars for so long. Yes, I'm lumping the other Gen 4 games in there too. These remakes simply streamline the Sinnoh experience for me. I can still appreciate the originals without putting them on a pedestal. I believe this whole debacle was just unfortunate timing. People were expecting these to be Heart Gold and Soul Silver levels of polish. It's completely valid to expect that out of a AAA franchise at this point. If I were to compare these to the other remakes, yeah, there's no contest. These are the least polished. I have played most of the remakes and their originals, so I know when something just doesn't hit the same. But when I only listen to the disappointed players, they're not exactly gonna convince me to try the game out anyway, despite their problems with it. They're most likely gonna say to not bother, which yeah, might save me a good chunk of money, but I would never know for myself. Even if I watch a full playthrough or an in-depth analysis, it's still not my own unique experience to properly judge. So after really sinking my teeth into these remakes, here are my biggest takeaways from this whole thing. First, discourse is everywhere. Unfortunately, with how social media works, the loudest opinions take priority because that's what grabs more attention. Underneath each heated debate are valid points, but it's really up to the consumer to decide. Everyone's saying that it's bad, therefore it must be bad for me, which I've learned is not always the case. Second, I don't actually know what a game is like until it's literally in my hands. Witnessing the Pokemon controversy throughout the Switch era was exhausting. All I wanted was for Pokemon games to just be fine, instead of infuriating fans. I believe people when they say they had real problems with the games, but I couldn't possibly know if the same would apply to me until I saw the whole game for myself. Every battle, every mechanic, every animation. Third, first impressions are everything, but time heals all wounds. I'm well aware of how rushed this game felt, but this is why I prefer to get new games much later, unless I know for sure that I will enjoy them day one. I feel like some of those same Pokemon players who clowned on the trailers rushed to get the game day one and were still disappointed. Like, I'm not sure what they expected if they came in with tarnished impressions from the get-go. It also helps that a friend gave this game to me for free, but even under normal circumstances, I would have saved myself the trouble and gotten it for a discount in order to stop myself from ranting on social media. Lastly, maybe I just need to admit that I'm obsessed with Pokemon. Not the one that expects way too much, but the one that loves catching them all way too much. And that means getting every mainline game and remake. As I've learned the hard way, Pokemon games never lose their value. As fans, we've really conditioned even the most casual players to need every Pokemon, even myself. Although I do have personal issues with the franchise, I can either dig my heels and protest until this company fixes all of its problems, or I can just take the good with the bad and focus on what I enjoy more than what I don't, like any healthy relationship. It's kinda scary seeing some people treat this corporate brand like an abusive relationship. Like, what? Who hurt them? And so what if I spent my money on a game I didn't end up liking? If I get so fed up that I'm going on online tirades because of it, that's when I know I've got bigger problems to deal with. I'm still allowed to feel and express my dissatisfaction here and there, but it shouldn't be the sole reason for swearing off a franchise for good. You can get rid of the games, much harder to get rid of those fond memories. Take this as a lesson. Just because a lot of other people think a game is trash, doesn't mean that it's meaningless to you. Mediocre, even bad games can still bring joy to someone's life, albeit in less conventional ways. Maybe plowing through brain-dead CPUs and laughing at the jank can still provide value. At the same time, I can't convince anyone else that BDSP is worth their time, but what I can tolerate and enjoy might be a deal breaker for them, and vice versa. It makes me wonder if BDSP were released at any other time, would they have been received just as poorly? Especially in a culture that wasn't so obsessed with the next-gen experience? Does a game always have to be this massive, beautiful innovation? Maybe I don't want to play a blockbuster game right now. Maybe I'm not in the mood for new experiences. Maybe I just need something familiar and good enough. For as many missteps the Pokemon Switch games all had, I guarantee that they'll still be part of someone's nostalgia in the future. It doesn't mean that everyone has to like them, but time will inevitably be kinder to these games. Yes, even BDSP. I just so happen to be in the camp that doesn't hate the Sinnoh remakes. In fact, I actually kinda like them. For the inferior story? Nope. For the lackluster graphics? Absolutely not. For the rushed release? Oh god no. Instead, for the ways I found the game more fun for myself. I can look past the faults the same way a millennial would for Gen 1. I totally understand why some people can't stand what this remake represents, but there still exists a camp of people who accept it anyway. I just don't hear that perspective as much. Let's be real, the Sinnoh remakes aren't winning any awards, but despite that, I can genuinely say that I've enjoyed my time with it. And personally, that's all I can really ask for.